Today on CityCast DC. The rideshare app Empower, which, if you haven't heard of it, works like Uber or Lyft, except less expensive, has had a whirlwind few weeks. I'm talking whiplash. The owner was even threatened with jail time if he did not shut down the app, and now he's back in court. So what exactly is going on with this rideshare app, and why has it been so controversial in DC? Martin Austermuhle from the 51st is here to explain. Today's Tuesday, October 21st. I'm Bridget Todd, and here's what DC is talking about. Martin, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so for folks who don't know, what is Empower, and just generally, what is their deal?
So on a very basic level, Empower is exactly like Uber or Lyft. It's just an app that you use to get a ride somewhere. You open it, you say where you want to go, and it hails a driver. The driver shows up, takes you, and it pays everything through the app on your credit card. Very simple. Now, the big difference is, or Empower says the big difference is, it's just cheaper than Uber or Lyft. They say on average 20% cheaper for every single ride, and I've checked the app multiple times. It is definitely cheaper than Uber or Lyft. Now, the issue about why it's cheaper is also the issue about why it's in this big fight with the city. In short, Uber and Lyft contract directly with their drivers. So the drivers are not exactly employees of Uber or Lyft, but they're essentially contracted employees, right? Whereas Empower doesn't do that. They basically say they're just giving drivers this software to then connect directly with riders. So technically, Empower is just like, we're just an app provider. We provide the technology. You guys do all the driving. So this means that they keep their overhead lower. They just don't have the same kind of big corporation structure as Uber or Lyft. But it also means that they're kind of sneakily avoiding some of the city's regulations on companies like Uber or Lyft. And that's what the big fight is.
So I don't know if this is true or not, but I've heard Empower say the reason why it's good is that it's better for drivers because drivers get, I think, 100% of the money. Is that true?
That is true. And this is, again, one of the way that they structure things, that basically every driver pays a monthly subscription to use the app instead of kicking up like a portion of every fare like that you do with Uber or Lyft. So like an Uber or Lyft driver could take a $30 ride and then they have to kick back $15 of it to Uber or Lyft or something like that. Whereas Empower, they basically get to mostly set their own rates and then they keep 100% of the money. And then at the end of the month, they look at all the money that they made and then that determines what their subscription fee is for Empower.
Got it. So Empower, I've been calling them a rideshare company. I believe that to be the case because you use your phone to summon a ride to your home. But they say, oh, no. We just are a software company, a tech company, and we just give drivers the ability to use our tech. What's really going on here? Is this the sort of sticking point with the DC government?
It is. Yeah, it is a big sticking point. Now, then again, remember, and I'm old enough to remember when Uber first came to town back about 12 years ago. And when that happened, they said the same thing. They said, we're not a transportation company. We're a technology company. We're a platform. We're just providing the means for drivers and riders to connect. But Uber and Lyft both eventually accepted that they were probably a little more than that they're actually a transportation company, not that different to a taxi cab. So they entered into negotiations and they eventually got regulated in the district like they are pretty much everywhere in the country. Empower is very much fighting this because they really stick by this idea that we do not, the drivers are not, the riders themselves are not our customers. The drivers are our customers. And that's what they are. They're customers. We provide them an app, they pay us some money for this app, and then everything that they do with riders is their business. So that's why Empower is arguing that it shouldn't be regulated the same way that Uber and Lyft are.
It's really a good reminder that Uber and Lyft played through this same saga of, we're not a rideshare company when they came to DC. I was also living in DC then. I remember when Uber came to town. It was I think I didn't quite realize that we were all sort of riding high on this Silicon Valley VC money. And so your Ubers were super cheap. I remember I would explore parts of the city that I would never have gone to otherwise because it would be a $5 Uber to get there. Things have really changed since then. But I'm curious, can you take me through how the sort of rideshare in DC landscape has looked since then?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, ultimately, the regulations that they set up were pretty basic. It was essentially that Uber had to, one of the big parts of it was that Uber had to ensure that all of its drivers were registered. They had to make sure that they had driver's licenses, that they went through background checks, like that sort of basic stuff. But then more importantly than that, they had to, Uber as a company or Lyft as a company had to offer commercial ride insurance. Basically, so if you're a driver, you have your personal driver's insurance, but the minute you start using your car for commercial purposes, like people are paying you for rides, your insurance will not apply if you get into an accident. Hence this commercial insurance, which is more expensive. But again, that's how Uber and Lyft are structured. That's how they work right now. Part of the reason they're probably a little more expensive is because they have to pay all this overhead now that they're basically transportation companies. Empower doesn't do that. I mean, they check driver's licenses. They say they do background checks. They kind of have zero tolerance policies for, people who have criminal records or maybe, get caught drinking and driving. But they don't require, they say they require insurance, but they don't require commercial insurance, and they're not checking that. So basically the city's complaint is it's basically drivers who are driving around, which is fine, but they don't have the right insurance, so that if an accident happens, who gets left hanging? Well, potentially the rider. If the rider is injured, if something happens to them, they could call the insurance company, and the insurance company will just be like, well, tough luck, but that driver does not have the right insurance, so you're out of luck.
So just to make it super clear, it sounds like Empower is not really licensed to be doing the kind of commercial riding that they're doing, but they're saying, hey, that's between the driver and the person in the car. We have nothing to do with that. We just make the software.
Yeah, 100%. And again, this has been going on for 5 years. And ever since they got to DC, the city kind of wised up really quickly or noticed what was happening and started taking enforcement actions. They would impound cars. They would ticket drivers. And there was this kind of emerging back and forth legally between Empower and the city. But we're 5 years in, and it's still ongoing because Empower really is fighting much more than Uber or Lyft ever did. It's like, it's funny. They've learned a lot from the Uber playbook, but they've just taken it a whole step further.
What does that look like? How have they been fighting back?
I mean, I can't tell you how many court cases are currently ongoing with Empower because there's so many, and they're at so many different levels of the district's court system. I mean, from just adjudicative bodies that deal with like fines on basic offenses, all the way up to Superior Court, up to the Court of Appeals. Everything the city does, Empower has fought and then kept fighting. And so the most recent one was basically about a year and a half ago. The city issued a cease and desist and said, you have to stop operating. You're not in compliance with our regulations. So Empower started fighting that one, but ultimately a judge came down and said, no, you literally are not complying with the city's regulations. You have to stop. And if you don't, I'm going to hold you in contempt. The judge started doing that. And that was almost a year ago that the contempt ruling came down, and they've been hitting the company with fines. And we're talking right now, the city says Empower owes them more than roughly $50 million in fines, none of which have been paid, which Empower itself says it cannot afford to pay. And this all escalated to basically this month when the CEO of Empower was threatened with jail time, and he was going to go to jail. Like a judge was about to say, listen, you have violated so many of my orders that I have no recourse but to send you to jail. She did that, and then she quickly stayed her own ruling and said, we know you're going to appeal, so we're just going to I won't send him to jail just yet. So we're basically back to square one, but they have been fighting for 5 years.
Mark the date. This November 8th in DC, join the National Center for Victims of Crime for its 40th anniversary gala. It's an evening of celebration and sparkle, with dinner and a silent auction filled with one-of-a-kind treasures. Raise a glass with friends, honor champions of hope, and help make sure life-changing support for crime survivors remains accessible. Join NCVC for an unforgettable night of connection and purpose, all while supporting services that make a real difference in your community. Go to victimsofcrime.org/40 today to grab your tickets and join us for this unforgettable night. That's victimsofcrime.org/40. When someone else's negligence changes your life forever, figuring out what to do next can feel overwhelming. You need lawyers who won't back down. NACE Law Group has been winning serious injury and wrongful death cases in DC for decades. They don't just settle, they fight for real justice. And they're not afraid to take cases to court to get it. Because when you're facing medical bills, lost wages, and unimaginable pain, good enough isn't good enough. You might remember them as Paulson and Nace. It's the same trusted lawyers, just a new name. If you need someone in your corner, reach out to NACE Law Group for a free, no-obligation consultation. Visit WashingtonDCLawyers.com or call 202-463-1999. That's 202-463-1999. If I were to open Empower right now, what's the status of it? Would I be able to continue to get rides?
Yeah, Empower functions perfectly well as it did before. It functions in DC just the way it does in Maryland or Virginia. The only thing that you'll notice differently, that riders would notice differently, is a little pop-up will show up. And you know how it is with terms of service. How often do we read the fine print? Rarely. But this pop-up basically says that there's no contract anymore between the drivers and Empower. And that's just a very legalistic way, a clever legalistic way that Empower was another way they were trying to get around the city's regulations by saying, we have zero contract with our drivers at all. They are completely independent, so you can't regulate us as a company. But other than that, you're still hailing a car, the driver's going to show up, you're going to pay them the fare, and then life is going to go on pretty much as usual. Now, drivers are running the risk because what they're doing is not legal, and they can be pulled over by the city and they can be ticketed and their cars can be impounded.
I've never used Empower myself, but I know a few people who have, and they do tell me, oh, it definitely is cheaper. So I know people who have had great experiences with it. They love Empower, but I also know people who have had not great experiences with Empower, where it seems like maybe the drivers are not being vetted so well. Can you speak to the way that people have responded to this service being in DC?
The funniest thing about this is that there's all this drama around a company that every time I've reported on it, someone comes up to me and says, what is Empower? I'd never heard of this company. Because Uber and Lyft are just the giants in the room, right? They must be doing, I don't know how many, the majority of the rides that people are taking in the city. Now, Empower says it does a lot of rides. It says, I think they have 1,000-ish drivers in the metropolitan area. So that's DC, Maryland, and Virginia. And they say they don't get any complaints, that services are great. It's obviously tough to vet that because we can't see inside their own systems, but there have been lawsuits. City regulators say that they have heard of complaints. Some of the lawsuits have involved what I mentioned before about commercial insurance. There was one rider who was involved, the car was involved in an accident. She then tried to get the insurance company to cover some costs, and the insurance company said we can't because it's personal insurance, not commercial insurance. So she had to sue Empower. And then I think there's also just complaints about how much vetting is Empower doing in terms of actual background checks. They say they do them, but it's all, again, the city doesn't have a way to check that really. And that's another big issue is that the city is essentially saying, is one of their arguments is we shouldn't just take you at your word that you're checking driver's licenses and making sure that everybody has a background check. But that's essentially the situation that's where things are right now.
Other than trying to play kind of legal trickery around the city, what is Empower doing to try to fix this situation?
Yeah, and to Empower's credit, I will say this: it's really interesting. That it's a two-faced beast to a certain degree. In court, they're very kind of exactly how you'd expect a corporation to operate in court. They've got their good, well-paid lawyers, very kind of, they're doing it professionally. But the minute they walk out of the courtroom, their CEO, Josh Sear, is a fighter. He comes out sounding like a character out of Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand. He's like the libertarian hero here. And he says he has been pushing to get the company properly licensed in the district. The district says, well, you may have applied a couple times, but you're not complying with the rules, so we can't accept your applications. But he also says that he has asked the council to change the law, this existing law, to basically allow Empower to become legal without changing the way it operates. Now, the DC Council, I've asked around, and they're like, look, we made Uber and Lyft do this. What's the big deal? Just do what Uber and Lyft are doing, and things will be fine. So right now, we're at a bit of a stalemate that Empower says it's doing everything it should be doing to be legal. The city says, not really. And they're just constantly fighting this out in courtrooms.
What do you think the possibility is of Empower shutting down for good?
Zero. I'm not a betting man, but I absolutely would bet that they would never shut down. Given that it's been 5 years and the CEO literally came probably within an hour of getting sent to DC jail because of all of what was happening and because he was in contempt of court. Ultimately, he did not. But the point is, he is, again, whether you love him or hate him for it, he's a fighter. A lot of drivers love that he's fighting on their behalf because they see this guy who is legitimately taking a personal risk to kind of support their livelihoods. So I don't think Empower is going to shut down. I don't think they're going to go away quietly. It does sound, at the last court hearing recently, it sounded like they were trying to find a way to resolution. One of the attorneys asked the district if the city would be willing to waive those $50 million in fines, which again, I think the city, I don't know if they'd waive all of them, but they'd probably be flexible. Because again, I don't think it benefits anybody for this to keep going and for this to be fought out in the courts forevermore.
Do you think the city would just waive that $50 million that they say that Empower owes the city?
I don't know that they waive all of it, because then the argument could well be, doesn't that just send the message to everybody else that like just come to DC and break the law often enough, and eventually if you break it big enough, the city will eventually forgive it. It's not a great message, obviously. So I think the city might push back and say, no, listen, there are some basic violations here that we have to kind of get some, there have to be consequences for. But I also think realistically, like $50 million, like Empower's not worth $50 million. So like there's no way they're paying those fines.
Yeah, and this has really been such an interesting story to watch unfold, especially when you had the CEO facing jail time. I remember thinking, like, is he really going to go to jail over this? Are there any especially ridiculous details that have come up about Empower and this whole saga from your reporting?
I will say this, it's so fascinating to see, like when Uber waged its fight, there was a lot of like activity, like riders who swore by Uber, who said the black car service was amazing and like how dare the city not allow it to be legal. There was a lot of that. This is not just riders, this is drivers. I mean, you go to every single court hearing and it is full of drivers to the point that they have to stop letting drivers in. I mean, the last court hearing, they literally closed the door and we can't take more drivers in this place. So there's that. There's a certain passion from the drivers, many of whom are immigrants. And I think that's something we didn't see as much during the Uber kind of saga. The other thing was fascinating. The last court hearing I was at, there was an attorney, just a random attorney, who was talking to a driver. And the driver just outright admitted that, like, yeah, they don't have commercial insurance. And yes, they know that's a problem. And yes, they know if they get into an accident, they have to ask the rider to just not mention Empower. Just be like, look, you're just my buddy. I'm giving you a ride. Let's hope no one notices. So there's a recognition that like there's a fundamental unregulated aspect of this that could be problematic that libertarians love. They're just like, adults should be able to make the decisions that they want as long as those decisions are informed. If your driver doesn't have insurance and you know it, awesome. You should be able to get a cheap ride. But a lot of riders probably don't know this. And I think it might change someone's mind if you literally tell them like, listen, you're getting into a car. God forbid it gets into an accident. You may not have a recourse if you're injured.
That really paints a compelling portrait of what's going on. And I think from the writer's perspective, again, I've never taken Empower, but I've been in situations where I've been staying in an Airbnb or something, and it's not till I'm checked in that Airbnb that I realize, oh, this is an illegal Airbnb, and the host has asked me to lie to their neighbors. I think those kind of situations are, I don't know, I'm not sure that a lot of people would be down for potentially lying to police in order to get a cheaper ride to the airport or whatever.
Right, and that's where we find ourselves. It's like an app-based world where everything is available with these really cool, convenient services. But it's kind of it can feel sometimes like a little bit of a race to the bottom, because one service comes in, does it really well, then they become the dominant player like Uber or Lyft, and then they can get away with raising prices. And then everybody starts looking for alternatives, and the alternatives will eventually show up and they'll offer lower prices. But we always have to stop and ask ourselves, like, what's the catch here? Like, how is it that how is it that you are so much cheaper than everyone else? There might be a very legitimate reason, or it might be, well, you found a clever way to not do what the regulations require. Love or hate the regulations. So your Airbnb example is great. Like, would you think differently about Airbnb if you went there not knowing that, like, they have to have smoke detectors, or that they need to have like, a window in the bedroom so you can actually get out if there's a fire? Those are all things that a lot of Airbnbs have to have if they're regulated, but that can increase costs. So like, do you want to pay $50 less for that night stay if, like, God forbid there's a fire and you will never know? I mean, it's an individual decision.
Yeah. And it's so easy to say, oh, I'll do it for a deal. And then when, God forbid, there is a fire, or God forbid something happens, I can personally say that I would be the first person who says, well, why was there not some regulation to protect me from this? Even though I might have been down for it when it felt like a way to get a good deal. Yeah.
And the fascinating part of this is the whole Empower fight has become this like cause on the libertarian side. Like Reason Magazine, which is libertarian in its leanings, has been covering this really, really well from a libertarian perspective, because they see this as an issue of an over-regulated city driving up costs for everybody. And then this like this new clever player coming in and deciding that they want to offer cheaper prices by kind of sneaking around some of those regulations. Like, what's not to love about that? It's like freedom for everybody, cheap prices for everybody. And I got to talking to the reporter recently, and I really respect his perspective on it. I think it's an interesting angle. It's just not Uber or Lyft, only because I think the Uber Lyft fight was a very particular moment in time. Like, everybody knew taxi cabs suck. So when Uber came around and offered a better alternative, it was a huge deal. But now it's kind of like, what? There's another app like ride sharing service. Like, how is this different than Uber or Lyft? I have no idea. This is very like the Uber and Lyft fight, but the big difference being, I think people have kind of like internalized and accepted in a way that Uber and Lyft are just the biggest players in town, and they're just the easiest way to go.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. We were at a CityCast member event recently, and I got into a long conversation with a couple of people about Empower, one of whom loved Empower, had been using Empower, thought it was great, and that when, at a certain point during the legal fight, Empower had reached out to riders saying, hey, come to the DC courthouse. Like, we want our ridership in DC to be making noise about why we need to keep Empower in DC. And I said, oh, is that something that you would have done? And she said, never. I like this service. It's cheaper than Uber or Lyft or taxi cabs, but I'm not going to go in the middle of a weekday down to the courthouse to make my voice heard about it. It's not part of my identity. And I do think, even if you like a deal on a ride somewhere, it's another thing to be asked to see this as your fight, right? To be asked to see this as, I need to be giving my time and my voice to protecting this rideshare app in DC.
Yeah, no, and again, you're totally right. But to Empower's credit, they've been very good at like organizing this, at least with drivers. I mean, you show up to one of these protests and they'll come with a box truck, open it up, and there's pre-written signs like opposing what the city is doing that say like Mayor Bowser's selling out residents and drivers. They have T-shirts for everybody. They give ride credits to anybody who shows up. Like, they have made the protesting part of the business plan, which is to a certain degree pretty brilliant, honestly. But it can also feel somewhat astroturfy. Like, you really ask yourself, like, okay, some people literally care about this. Some drivers are very much making their living off of this and they care about this passionately. But in other cases, like, are they just doing this because they got a $50 ride credit and they get like a free T-shirt and they potentially get a free meal? I mean, potentially.
It really does sound like they've learned a lot from other, like Airbnb, Uber, Lyft, because that definitely was also part of their strategy to come to cities like that.
Yeah, and I've always wanted to ask, I haven't gotten to him yet with this one question, but my next logical question is, all right, let's say Empower settles its beef with the city, life moves on. What's to stop the next app developer to come in and say, I'm going to undercut even Empower by doing something even more, wildly unregulated? Look, it could happen. It could literally be like, I'm not even going to do background checks. I'm just going to trust that drivers are not, sexual predators or alcoholics, and charge way less for rides.
It's all, at a certain point, it could be all unregulated apps the whole way down.
It kind of is, yeah. And there's this, basically. And again, I think for people who are of the libertarian bent, they're just like, look, as long as I know that this person who's driving me, potentially has a criminal record or might have an alcohol problem, I'm fine with that if I get a better deal.
So what happens next? Where do we go from here?
I wish I could tell you, because all the reporters who've been covering this left the most recent court hearing where the CEO almost got tossed in jail, but then was saved at the last minute. And we walked out of there and we're like, so basically status quo. I mean, at this point, the city is probably going to keep finding the Empower. Empower is going to keep driving around the city. I think there is at some point going to be a moment where they're just going to have to sit down with some sort of like marriage counselor and be like, how do we figure this out? Because at this point, the courts themselves, the judges can't do it, haven't done it. It's not really in their purview necessarily to negotiate a conclusion, negotiate some sort of like surrender. But I think you need like a therapist to sit down with like the head of Empower and like someone from the city and be like, how can we make this work so you guys can pretend to love each other?
That's a great way to put it. Martin, thanks so much for being here.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
That is all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter. And if you like conversations like this, just become a CityCast DC member. You can do that at membership.citycast.fm. We'll be back tomorrow morning with even more news from around the city. Talk to you then.